Here we go with the first pack, and we immediately have an interesting decision between Stab Wound, the best common, and Palisade Giant, which is quite an impactful white rare. It does cost 6, which is quite a bit, and sometimes it doesn't do all that much, but in other games it's a complete blowout, making it impossible for your opponent to kill you. I like both cards better than Corrasta Guildmage. I think Guildmage is fine, but not that great. Also, committing myself to 2 colors with my first pick is just worse than only 1. And I like picking Stab Wound here. It's kind of the only good Rakdos card I see, and only the Guildmage competes for Golgari cards. And in general, Selesnya and cards like the Knightly Valor we saw will go pretty early, and that means there's usually a lot of drafters in the same colors. Now, there's a Rixmadi Guildmage. This booster is missing a rare, and that would be a very good follow-up to the Stab Wound. Alternatively, we have Explosive Impact. Golgari Longlegs is good, but not of second pick caliber, I feel like. And there's really no reason to pick the Justiciar when there is a Guildmage in the pack for us, and we have just passed a Palisade Giant. It looks like there are more defensive options in these packs than offensive ones. There isn't a single Rakdos card, except maybe for Slitherhead, but that's somehow pushing it. So the problem is any defensive options really make our Guildmage that much worse. It's a card that only works on offense really, but then it works really well. But given that this pack just doesn't have any alternatives, I think we should just go with Void Wielder or Hover Barrier here. And in general, Hover Barrier feels like it's going to be the stronger card. In the beginning I would have thought that Void Wielder is better, but Hover Barrier with its 6 toughness is really a big deal. Here we have Rakdos Key Rune. If we want to stay on our original plan, the alternatives are Towering Indrik and Grim Roustabout. There's also a cancel, but I'm not really wanting to go into blue. Also doesn't pair well with Stab Wound, which is the most powerful card so far. I think that Rakdos Key Rune is the best key rune, and it's also much better than Grim Roustabout. Grim Roustabout as a defensive creature is just weak, and offensively it being 2/2 is only relevant on turn 2 basically. So this guy has dropped quite a bit in my evaluation, and I think picking up a key rune here should not be a big problem. Even in aggressive decks, a 3/1 first strike, even if it's slow, is still quite powerful. Here we have quite some options for a 5th pick. Brush Strider, Slithway Scorpion, Dead Reveler, Sealer of Secrets, and Trostani's Judgment are all cards that I'm happy to main deck, and Aerial Predation is pretty close 6th one. I feel like Dead Reveler is the clear choice here. I don't see a reason to go into green, and blue wasn't really what we intended to draft anyway, so picking up one of the good Unleash 3-drops is exactly what we want. Next, there is once again a Grim Roustabout, which I just talked about. There's also some more expensive options in Spawn of Rixmadi and Tenement Crasher, as well as a Dino Charge that can be good in the red decks, but usually needs some support cards like Goblin Rally. So overall, I think that Grim Roustabout, as I've said, isn't actually that great in Rakdos, but I like Spawn of Rixmadi quite a bit. So I'm not drafting Rakdos as aggressively as in the beginning, because it's also more difficult to get the cheap Unleash creatures. So I'm going towards a more curvy, expensive deck with my picks. Now here, there isn't really much for us. We could draft an Injunction, but that doesn't seem too great. Batterhorn is actually quite fine. Trader's Instinct much better in the more aggressive versions of Rakdos, which should be pretty obvious. However, it's still a card that we might want to pick up. It never hurts to have one in your deck. Rakdos Ringleader, I don't really like. It just doesn't add too much to the board, considering the 6 mana investment. And Batterhorn is worse than other 5 drops we can get, so I'm going to go with a little more situational card here. Next up we have the option between Deviant Glee and Perilous Shadow, which are both better than Tenement Crasher. And even though we aren't drafting the most aggressive decks, Glee still fills a very, very important role in this deck. We are going to have no evasion except for large creatures that can't block, and making sure that they connect and punch through damage is really, really important for any Rakdos deck. So I'm going to pick the Glee rather than going for some of the other options there. Now, Trader's Instinct, like I said, I don't necessarily want 2 of them if I don't have any ways to sacrifice, but for signaling purposes I'm going to pass all the other cards here. And it's actually fine to play 1 Bellows Lizard, I've found. Isn't the greatest, but it also it's usually good enough to trade with something later on. So we are continuing the passing of cards that aren't in our color, and hopefully that's going to work out. Next up we have Lobber Crew and Frostburn Weird, also the option to go for a second spawn of Rixmadi, but that's another 5-drop which isn't high on our list. So Frostburn Weird is certainly better if you have access to blue mana as well. It's okay if you are only black-red. Lobber Crew has a very powerful effect to close out games, but it is kind of slow and clunky, so I think that Frostburn Weird is clearly the better card. It's also possible that we might want to splash blue, but not for the cards we see here. Next we have a simple pack, because there's basically only 2 options, a second Frostburn Weird and a Splatter Thug. Now, Frostburn Weird doesn't really get that much better in multiples, because they drain your mana pretty much whenever you have at least 1 on the table, so having 2 isn't actually that great. And Splatter Thug is insane with cards like Deviant Glee or Pursuit of Flight, simply because a 5/5 first striking creature is almost unblockable. So even though my 2-drops need some help, I'm going to go with Splatter Thug here. It's also easier to cast, which is relevant. This looks like we are getting to pick an aggressive 1-drop here. It's better than Pursuit of Flight, and hopefully we can get some spawns of Rixmadi later. I would happily play 2 in this kind of deck. Pursuit of Flight is okay, but not something we are highly looking for. And that's a promising pack. There's Rakdos Ragemark, Zenicav Locust, and Annihilating Fire still in the pack. So we're going to get a removal spell, which we didn't have many before of. And this might be the time where we pick up a Pursuit of Flight. Alternatively, we have a Perilous Shadow, but Perilous Shadow is not what the Rakdos deck wants to do in general. It's fine to play one as a late game option, but we already have Frostburn Weird and Rixmadi Guildmage, Rakdos Keyrune to do stuff with excess mana, so I don't feel that's an important addition right now. Pursuit of Flight, however, can be pretty brutal in the earlier turns of the game, and also later it makes one of your bad creatures into a threat, which is all you want with this kind of strategy. Now here it's Gorehouse Chainwalker. Civic Saber doesn't really compare. And I kind of like Gutter Snipe here, simply because for the few points of damage it can shoot, it makes up for only being a 3 mana 2/2. And there are some decks that just can't race it, which is always nice. Here the only real card in our colors is the Racketeer, which I almost never play, but Racecourse Fury is too bad, I feel like, so I'm going to take it. And here we have the decision between Electrickery and Spawn of Rixmadi. I don't know if more spawns are going to come to us from this pack, but it's one of my favorite creatures simply because it has 4 toughness. It's kind of like the bad version of Golgari Longlegs, and Electricity would only be in the sideboard most likely. Only if I get a second Splatter Thug, Electricity rises in value a little bit more because of First Strike. So here I'm just going to continue picking black-red cards, as I feel that's going to be where I want to be. Let's pick this card. I'm not going to play it, but who knows. Armory Guard is really good against us, and we don't want 3 Bellows Lizards, so I'm going to hate draft this. And we have another simple pack where we get an Augur Spree and hopefully table either one of these 3 cards, and we can count the cards that might go before that. Cellar, Gatekeeper Vine, Void Wheeler are all better, so that's 6 cards. Maybe somebody picks Fall of the Gavel, and Overgrown Tomb is probably going to be taken simply because for its monetary value, so I'm going to pick the Augur Spree here. Great removal spell, nothing too complicated. Next we have a very green pack, nothing for us really. There's a Guildgate or a Daggerdrome Imp, as we don't want a third Trader's Instinct that would just not do much in our deck. I'm not the greatest fan of Daggerdrome Imp if you don't have at least a few ways to improve its power, increase its power. So I think Guildgate might actually be better to smooth out our draws. And once again, not the greatest of packs. Selesnya Charm and Nearpath Guildmage are very good, both very good, but not castable for us. So for us it's between Grim Roustabout and Perilous Shadow. And I'm going to take the Shadow here. As I said, I don't like Grim Roustabout all that much, and Perilous Shadow is quite underrated. Having one certainly doesn't hurt. And here we have the option of taking a second one or just hate drafting something. But given that there is at least 3 insane Selesnya commons, it doesn't make sense to take one of them, because it's not going to weaken what the remaining players get out of this pack. So we have a second Shadow now. And we aren't going to take the third one, obviously. We also don't need a Cobble Boot now because we have 2 4-drops. And I think we have to decide between Assassin Strike and Havoc Festival. Havoc Festival certainly being the more fun card, but it's probably just worse than Assassin Strike. Sadly, I would have liked to try this card. And also some very late Heralds going around. Already scared of playing against the Selesnya Populate deck. Second Deviant Glee, very nice pickup. Golgari Longlegs, also great because we can cast it with only black mana. And here we could actually pick the Tavern Swindler. It's never going to be great, but it's 2-drop if we decide that we need another one, although I highly doubt it. Alternatively, we could go for a Skullrend, which isn't the worst, but I feel like this deck probably wouldn't play it. Oh, on the other hand, can be quite nice. No, we want our mana for Perilous Shadow or for one of our 5-drops after turn 4. And because of passing all these Roustabouts, we might actually want to play Tavern Swindler, as it turns out. This would have been better with Skullrend, though. And the second Pursuit of Flight should be much better than Mind Rot. A lot of powerful cards in the pack. I also like Seller of Songbirds quite a bit. Here we have the option to hate draft a card because we don't need a third Trader's Instinct. Trestle Troll is very good against us, but I'm much more scared of Rootborn Defenses, simply because it's really hard to see it coming. So I like to get rid of these cards. I don't want to give the Selesnya decks more tools to beat up on an already bad matchup for me. So let's see what we have here. Shouldn't be a problem to play the key rune and 17 lands because of our focus on late game cards in addition to the aggressive options of Rakdos, basically. We might actually have to play the Racketeer simply because we don't have that many options to choose from. Also, Gutter Snipe is pretty bad in this deck. It's almost never going to trigger, so we only have 3 instants or sorceries if we don't play a Traitorous Instinct. Now, I'm not going to play any of these. They aren't really playable, so Vandal Blast, of course, not a main deck card. I think the remaining options are Bellows Lizards, Traitorous Instincts, and the Street Sweeper, where I can see myself playing a Traitorous Instinct, but then I would probably have to cut a Pursuit of Flight, simply because that would be too many spells that don't do anything without me having a somewhat favorable board position. You don't want to Instinct when you have 0 creatures on the board, because then you need some defense. And also my deck isn't too aggressive, so that Traitorous Instinct is actually not going to be too insane. So I could see myself cutting a Gutter Snipe for a Bellows Lizard, because, as I said, it's not going to trigger all that often, and Bellows Lizard is actually quite nice with some of the auras I have, and the pump ability is surprisingly relevant a lot of times. Could also play Street Sweeper, but I feel like my late game is sufficiently good with this high end, but also a lot of ways to use my extra mana. So kind of like playing 1 or 2 islands in this deck because of Pursuit of Flight. The only question is if Transguild Promenade is actually the better source of blue for me to make my mana a bit better. But I could also just see playing the blue straight up. So I think we should probably play a curve like this, which looks pretty good. And then we can see that we would like to have blue for Pursuit of Flight, but it's not necessary. So we can be pretty free in our mana distribution. Now, 1 blue source is given, and 2 wouldn't be the end of the world. My mana is looking rather tame. I just want double black for Perilous Shadow, and now that I have a Bellows Lizard, I also need some red. So I want my black and red to be pretty even, which means that I'm going to play this Transguild Promenade. It might come back to haunt me, but I feel like it's the safer card to include. And that leaves me with 14 sources, which I'm just going to distribute evenly between black and red, giving me the highest chance to see both colors in my opening hand. And also with 7 basics, a Guild Gate, and a Promenade, I have 8 sources of each color. Also 2 blue sources for Pursuit of Flight, which overall isn't that bad. Let's see how it does.